I'm retired Detective Chief Superintendent Liz Mead, and I'm just telling a little bit about my story, and this is part number 3. So I became a detective constable in Luton and worked on all serious crime investigations, from stabbings to rapes to robberies and arsons. And my CID career was very varied. And although I did miss the blue lights and the adrenaline rush of being on patrol, the job satisfaction of being a detective, piecing together evidence, bringing an offender to justice for a victim, was the reward that you could ask for. In addition to being a detective, I did some other few things in my career as well. I'll give a few of the highlights. One of those was being a prison liaison officer at Bedford Prison, investigating crime within the prison because there's a community there, and sharing intelligence and information. And this was working in an incredibly different environment to working in the police, but working together was so important. And as a result of being a prison liaison officer, I ended up working on a major investigation when the Yarlswood Immigration Detention Centre caught fire on Valentine's Day in 2002. And this was millions of pounds worth of damage was caused, and over 80 detainees fled into the night. And one of my roles was trying to locate those detainees. And it was a very challenging investigation. And just after working at the prison, I finally got promoted to Detective Sergeant. But this had taken me 16 years. I'd taken a long time. The foundations I thought were really important about being a detective. And one of my first cases as a Detective Sergeant was a cash for crash investigation, where over £5 million of assets were seized and criminal cases were brought against 45 defendants, with the ringleaders being imprisoned and the Proceeds of Crime Act being invoked. This really was an investigation whereby we were able to reduce the number of cash for crash claims for fraud and insurance. And Luton went from 25 in the country out of the league tables in terms of being an area where people were going to do that sort of criminality. So as well as cash for crash, there were other many investigations I worked on, but I think the ones that most probably mean the most to me were the murder investigations I worked on. And I think I counted there was most probably over 40 that I've been involved in at every detective rank and role, from taking statements to being a disclosure officer, the Homes Indexer, the intelligence officer, the outside inquiry DS. And then I had the privilege of leading these investigations as the senior investigating officer. I think having spent most of my career on serious crime investigations, my experiences doing the many front-line roles helped me to understand the teamwork that was needed to detect such heinous crimes, and always putting the victim at the heart of everything you do. And I think, as the quote goes, that I've seen on most SIOs' walls, and that's if they still have an office today to put a picture up or a quote up. The quote that rings very true to me is, "There is no greater honour ever bestowed on an officer or more profound duty imposed on them than when they are entrusted with the investigation of the death of a human being." And that is always something that's held very dear to me whenever I've investigated something. And I think my homicide and kidnap senior officer experience that I gained at the Bedfordshire, Cambridgeshire and Hertfordshire Major Crime Unit was where I worked collaboratively across 3 police force areas, very different police areas with different priorities. And I think whilst I was there, there definitely were many moments that will stay with me always. You can never unsee some of those scenes, and also the absolute devastation that murder has on a family and on the community. And just bringing offenders to justice for these crimes is simply the most precious role you can ever have. And I think you have to do it with professionalism, with compassion, and with determination to get justice. And that's justice for the person you never had the privilege to meet. As well as detecting and bringing offenders to justice, there's also, I think, a responsibility on detectives and certainly on senior officers to reduce the number and prevent the number of crimes that are happening and murder in particular. So in November 2015, I was really privileged to be involved in a Channel 4 documentary, which was called One Killer Punch. And it detailed one of my investigations where there were two men disagreeing over the rights to a disabled car parking space. And the consequences of that were absolutely tragic, with one man losing his life. And the One Punch, Two Lives campaign that ensued from this, from my work as an SIO, was a significant part of my career. And the families I worked with on this showed amazing courage in wishing to educate about the tragic consequences of just one punch. And it's not a pun, but it really was a hard-hitting media campaign that we utilised to try and get the message across. We did what we call nighttime economy visits in pubs and clubs around Bedfordshire, wearing T-shirts, just to get the message out to individuals that one punch really can cause such devastation. Then we also rolled out an education programme to the Bedfordshire schools, and education material was still there now, I believe. So on promotion, I did leave the major crime unit and I went to the public protection team. This was an incredibly steep learning curve for me, but I was able to work really closely with partners in the local authorities and health, dealing with child abuse cases, sexual physical abuse, domestic abuse, rape offences, child sexual exploitation, missing people, and so much more. And this job really covered all bases. And I think it was most probably one of my most challenging and harrowing roles in my career, because an officer can't go home until a child or a vulnerable person is safe. And I think it's an area of policing which has grown significantly over the last decades, especially with the increase of the reporting of child sexual abuse, and obviously the online presence of this awful crime that impacts so many individuals. It isn't just on the screen, there are real people behind those images. I think, as well as the day job of being a detective, I had lots of other opportunities to learn new skills and deal with very different, more niche areas of policing. And that included being a hostage and crisis negotiator, and also managing disaster victim identification. And that's a very unseen area. It's a local, national, and actually international commitment, where you seek to repatriate bodies with families where there have been absolutely awful crimes, terrorist atrocities, airplane crashes, or even natural disasters. I mean, it's incredibly challenging work, but again, I think it's a theme that keeps coming back. Teamwork in policing is so important, especially when you're dealing with the most tragic cases involving the loss of human life. So that kind of comes up to getting towards the end of my career now, I think. And in January 2018, I landed my dream job, which was the head of crime. And again, challenging times, but different reasons this time, because of resources, because of funding constraints, and also it was a great opportunity to work with professional, compassionate detectives and investigators who achieved absolutely phenomenal results, taking firearms and drugs off the streets of Bedfordshire. And we also brought back a burglary team, because that's such a private crime, having your house burgled. Even though it's about property, the impact lasts so long. It was also a time when we were classed as inadequate as a force, but fortunately the work that we all do together, we managed to get the HMIC inspection to good. And just when I thought it couldn't get any better, a year later in July 2019, I was provided the opportunity to be the Detective Chief Superintendent of Crime and Public Protection. This was a great honour and an amazing place, I think, to end my career, which combined my love of investigating serious and complex crime with public protection, renewing all those partnerships and those links I'd made in my public protection unit days, and again with those selfless detectives and investigators who are always striving for child and vulnerable adults to be protected. And all in all, I suppose that it's been a difficult career at times, but I always say, as long as you can sleep at night with the decisions that you've made and know you did your absolute best, you won't go too far wrong. And for me, I think policing is about common sense, valuing everyone, protecting society's vulnerable, and just doing the right thing, always, especially when no one's watching. Really important that that integrity runs through your whole career. Because policing is a family. You're tied together across county, across country, and across continents even. And that thin blue line, that symbol of pride and also sorrow. I think it's like all families. You love them, you get frustrated by them. Sometimes you're disappointed, but it's good to share the good times, the celebrations, because at all times in policing, you do have that sense of belonging. I definitely think it's that eternal tie I will take with me always. And it's a job that's excited me. The investigator that examines every detail wants to know what's happened all the time, that why question. The communicator to negotiate and influence in an interview room. I mean, who doesn't love a good interview, even though so many of them these days are no comment, or in a crisis situation. And really having those leadership skills to develop and nurture those following. You just want to inspire those to want to actually go and do the very best job that they can do, and also I think in the very best career. It's great to work alongside such professional individuals. At times they are the funniest people, and I would say that policing humour is so very special. I suppose I had the most amazing time as a police officer, especially as a detective. There were highs, there were lows, there was joy, there was sadness, there was fun and frustrations, and as I said earlier, things that can't be unseen. But the stories of the victims will stay with me always. And I do feel very privileged to have made a difference when people have been at their very rock bottom and changed their life just by doing my job. I think it's fair to say no one ever said policing would be easy, but I can promise you it's worth it, as it really is a job like no other.